going to get started. Sorry for the short delay. Good evening and welcome to Roosevelt House, the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. And as you may know, Eleanor Roosevelt was a great champion of refugees from World War II. We're very excited to be celebrating the publication of Amy Yee's book, Far from the Rooftop of the World. Amy is a Hunter alumna, a matter of great pride for us. And we look forward to an insightful discussion tonight about Tibetan refugees and their stories of navigation between worlds and multiple identities, and their efforts to preserve culture in exile amid forced migration. I want to thank Vivian Louie, Director of Hunter's Asian American Studies program, for bringing this event to us and co-hosting it with us. And I want to thank our team, Brianna Krumenacher and Hector Perez, for their work and dedication to making this evening's event a success. I want to welcome and thank our moderator tonight, Ken Roth, and Se-Wang Rigson, who's joining the panel, all of whom Vivian will further introduce. And following the discussion, I want to invite you to a reception upstairs on the first floor in the Four Freedoms room, where in addition to enjoying more conversation and a glass of wine, you will have an opportunity to buy Amy's book if you haven't already done so, and Amy will be there to sign your book. So with that, let me turn it over to Vivian Louie, and again, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and of course to Roosevelt House. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I also want to recognize Dr. Daniel Wu, who has joined Hunter College as the Helen Zia Distinguished Lecturer and Deputy Director of the Asian American Studies Program and Center. We're thrilled to have Dr. Wu here. I am so honored to have him here and to introduce our speakers tonight. So Amy Yee is an award-winning journalist, most recently with the Bloomberg City Lab, and previously as a Financial Times correspondent in New York and India, where she lived for 7 years. She won the United Nations Correspondents Association Award 3 times, 4 awards from the South Asian Journalists Association, a proud co-sponsor of today's event, and first place from the Association of Healthcare Journalists for Analysts about reducing the deaths of children in India and Bangladesh. In 2023, just recently, she won the Asian American Journalist Association Award for political reporting about protecting voting rights of immigrant voters, and a Society of Professional Journalists Award for racial equity reporting. AAJ is another co-sponsor today. Amy Yee is a McDowell and Logan Nonfiction Fellow, a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, Columbia Journalism School, and Wellesley College. And as Jessica has already noted, she is a proud alum of the Hunter College MFA in Creative Writing Poetry program. And the MFA program, along with the Sociology Department at Hunter College, Dr. Margaret Chin is the chair of sociology, are co-sponsoring tonight's event as well. I just wanted to briefly share, if I might, that there are copies of Amy's book, Far from the Rooftop of the World, with a foreword by the Dalai Lama, available after the talk. And part of the proceeds will go to a charity in India featured in the book that helps Tibetans, Indians, and animals in need. I also wanted to share some well-deserved praise for this book. So Peter Hessler, a writer for The New Yorker, a MacArthur Fellow, and a National Book Award finalist, said the book is, quote, beautifully observed, with full-bodied, engaging characters who are never lost in the shadow of Chinese politics. Amy Yee has done a wonderful job of capturing the details, the dramas, the dignities of Tibetan life in exile. The Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Over the course of more than a decade, Yee's interactions and correspondences with her Tibetan contacts blossomed into a nonfiction narrative that is among the first of its kind. I'm honored to introduce the 2 guests who will join Amy in conversation tonight. Ken Roth is the Charles and Marie Robertson Visiting Professor at the Princeton University School for Public and International Affairs. Until August of 2022, he served for nearly 3 decades as the executive director of Human Rights Watch, one of the world's leading international human rights organizations, which operates in some 100 nations. Before that, he was a federal prosecutor in New York and for the Iran-Contra investigation in Washington. A graduate of Yale Law School and Brown University, Roth has conducted numerous human rights investigative and advocacy missions around the world. He is quoted widely in the media, has written hundreds of articles on a wide range of human rights issues, devoting attention to the world's most dire situations: the conduct of war, the foreign policies of the major powers, and the work of the United Nations. Ken Roth is currently writing a book, Righting Wrongs, beautiful title, I might say, to be published by Knopf, about the strategies used by the Human Rights Watch to defend human rights. Amy and Ken are joined by Zewang Redzin, who was born in Tibet and escaped to India as a refugee in 1992 when he was 10 years old. Zewang earned bachelor's and master's degrees from Mangalore University in India, where he was president of the Regional Tibetan Youth Congress and the Tibetan Student Association. In 2012, he was selected for the Tibetan Scholarship Program. He earned a master's from Emory in 2015, and in 2023, just recently, congratulations, he earned a PhD from Columbia in social policy and economics, and he was deputy director of the Tibet Fund in Dharamshala in India, and currently he works as a city research scientist in the mayor's office of New York City. He is the author of Exile Tibetan Community: Problems and Prospects. And with that, I conclude my opening remarks. I welcome everyone to a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
In March 2008, there were big protests happening in Tibet. Some of you might remember. It was actually the biggest violent unrest since Tiananmen in 1989. So all the foreign correspondents and many journalists, Indian journalists as well, we all went up to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives in exile. It's in northern India. And that was completely unexpected. I was in southern India the day before and thought I was going to go to Bhutan in a few days for elections there, so I had to completely turn around and go up to Dharamsala and get there within a few hours, basically. And so I was late to the press conference. It's a long journey from Delhi. I took a plane and then had to go a 5-hour drive up these mountain roads. So I was late, and I was running to the press conference, literally. So there were no seats left, and so I was on the floor in the front. And the Dalai Lama could see me because I asked a question. And then after about 2 hours, the press conference was quite long, you would think he'd want to leave, but he lingered, and he actually he saw me again, and he made a beeline to me and came right over to me and said, "Chinese," right? And
you were the one Asian journalist there, I gather.
Yeah, I think so. I was the only East Asian. There were Indian journalists. So, and I'm American, born in Boston and grew up there. And so I didn't know, yes, I'm ethnically Chinese, but we had just spent 2 hours talking about this crackdown in Tibet that was turning violent. And, I think over 100 Tibetans were killed during that time. So I said, yeah, I'm American, but he was very excited to meet someone Chinese and even Chinese American, and he grabbed my cheeks and then said to me, this is between China and Tibet. We must discuss. It's between us. And you must tell them. And then he hugged me. So it was kind of a long hug, and I was just, awkwardly being hugged. Usually you're, as a reporter, you're observing, and then all the photographers that were there, because Reuters was there, AP, AFP, they all took photos of that, and then that photo went out around the world. Like a friend of mine who was in New Hampshire, who lives in Delhi, he was reading the Concord Monitor and then emailed me and said, Amy, did the Dalai Lama just hug you? Because I just saw a photo in the Concord Monitor. So that's just to say, that's the setting of when the book begins, and that's in the prologue. But some people have said to me, oh, so then you wrote the book because the Dalai Lama told you to, and that's not really what happened. It was actually more about being in Dharamsala, which is the hub of the Tibetan exile government, and about 10,000 or so Tibetans live there. And I was just really amazed by the place and the people. During that week I was there, thousands of Tibetans were marching, demonstrating in the streets, carrying the Tibetan flag and banners and posters and the Dalai Lama's portraits. And there were candlelight vigils, there were hunger strikes, there was everything going on. And I was just amazed at that, but just also amazed that you have this, haven of Tibetan culture and identity in India. And so I had been in Tibet in 98 and was just backpacking there after teaching English in China for 2 years. And when I went to Tibet itself, it's palpable. The fear is palpable, the anxiety, and the unease. And then you go to this parallel universe in India, and it's like, wow, this is what Tibetan culture and identity could be like if it could flourish freely. So some of you might not know, if you're in Tibet, you can be arrested for having the Dalai Lama's picture or the Tibetan flag, arrested or worse. People have been imprisoned for, just having his picture or the Tibetan flag. So it was really just amazement at the place and then the people, because there are plenty of Tibetans who were born in India and haven't been to Tibet, but they're very strongly Tibetan. And we'll talk more about that, but I was just really amazed and intrigued. It's kind of like if Tibet were a plant or flower. In Tibet, it's kind of caged, and then it's not getting the sunlight it needs, right? But then you take a clipping off, and you're going to plant it in a different soil in India, and it's still the same plant, but it's growing in a different soil now. So I love those issues of transplanting culture and migration, immigration, all those things. I've always been really interested in that. So that was the driving force.
Could you maybe talk just a bit about that before we get into the characters? Because most exile communities gradually integrate into their host countries. And over a generation or two, you don't get a lot of the old culture left. But the Tibetans seem to be taking a very different approach in Dharamsala.
Yeah. So in 1959, that's when the Dalai Lama fled, along with, probably at the time, like tens of thousands of Tibetans. One of his first priorities was to establish a Tibetan school in exile. And today the flagship school is known as Tibetan Children's Village, and the flagship school alone has 2,000 or so students, and there are about 80 different schools like that across India, and those were established over decades. But the Dalai Lama's first priority was to establish the schools before monasteries or temples or anything. That was seen as this is the way to preserve the language and identity, education, cultures. Yeah. So it's a very deliberate, very deliberate plan.
Okay, now this book, evokes that culture mainly through three people. And could you maybe talk a bit about, I don't know if you want to talk generically about them, and then we'll go into them one by one, but, they all left Tibet. They all had that in common. Could you talk a bit about the circumstances of that exile process?
Yeah, there are three main people I followed over a long period of time. There are many other people in the book because I actually moved up to Dharamsala, so I was living there. In a small town, you get to know people pretty well, and you see them on the streets. But one of the main people I met very early on in the book, his name is Norbu, and he was a teenager, maybe like 15 years old, when in 1988 he happened to be in Lhasa, and he happened to be like a bystander when these protests happened, and he got swept up in a police, sweep, and he then was imprisoned for 3 months, even though he had nothing to do with the demonstrations. And so during that time, he was beaten and interrogated. And when he was let out, he said he couldn't go to school. He was blacklisted. So he tried to do some work or find some odd jobs, and he said the police would then come and say, not allowed, and wouldn't let him do that. And so that went on for a long time. And I said to him, well, what did you do? And he said, I couldn't do anything. I just stayed and helped my mother, and she was always crying. And he said to me, and this is a subtitle of that chapter, in chapter 2, and he said to me, since then I lost my chance. And then his brother said to him, you can't do anything here, you should go to India. So he was a young man when he went there. And he enrolled not in Tibetan Children's Village, but in a different school called the Transit School, which is for older students whose education has been interrupted. And he had a really rough transition. It was really hard for him. I mean, he left his entire family, and he wasn't used to India, and his schooling had been interrupted when he was 15. So it was a really hard transition for him. And so, yeah, I wanted to, ask Zewang a bit about, I think you told me you remember those protests from '88, and, you've read some of the stories here, and just was wondering about, your background and how you decided to go to India.
First of all, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you, Amy, for writing this book on Tibetan story of exile, lost, and resilience. I think it is truly important because it seems to me that the world tend to pay more attention on the conflict where people resort to more violent means to reach their goal. And for Tibetans, under the leadership of Dalai Lama, we have been genuinely committed about the non-violent, peaceful way of achieving or fighting for our fundamental human rights and freedom. And it's sometimes disheartening to see that the world is not giving due attention to these such conflicts. So Amy's book is really helpful for creating awareness on Tibetan stories. As introduced, I was born in Tibet. I escaped to India when I was around 11 years old. So it happened, my grandfather suggested my parents that one of the two sons should be sent to India. And my parent asked both of us who want to go to India. I don't know why, but I volunteered. I was so excited about that. I said, I'm going to India. Never did I realize that that will be the last time I'll be seeing that will be a life-changing event for me. I've never seen my families, or I've never been able to go back to Tibet since then. And Ken, when I was having this conversation just before this, he asked me, are you based in New York? I was like, yes, currently I'm based in New York. So I don't have a permanent address. I mean, I do have my permanent address, that back in Tibet, but I'm not free to go there. In fact, yesterday, I had a dream of meeting my families back in Tibet, and that's only happens in dream. That was the most repeated dream that I often have. So that's a typical a life or experience of being lost or being away from home, not voluntarily, but somebody forcing us to go there. So it's a typical life of refugees. So in 1980s, when Norpu in the character, he was witnessing that protest. I was there in Tibet, and I might be around 9 or 8 years old, and I could see that was time when Hu Jintao, the previous Chinese president, was party secretary of Tibet Autonomous Region. And at that time, for the first time in the Tibetan history, there was a martial law declared by Hu Jintao for about a year, and I could see a uniformed Chinese, not police, but army in the full army gear on the top of our buildings. And often my parents used to hide us in a huge storeroom of our apartment, and it was very scaring sight for a small kid like me. But despite all these things, I have always I always thought that the People's Liberation Army or Communist Party of China is a savior. I always, when there was a kind of, a TV show where Japanese and Chinese fight together, I always kind of, I'm up for the People's Liberation Army. That's how we have been taught in kind of brainwashed in school. So this is similar experience in most of the characters in Ami's book, I think.
Can I ask you a bit about your experience at TCV? That's the Tibetan Children's Village. So you were 11 when you went to India. And what are your memories of the school, and what was the influence of the school and the significance of it more broadly?
Sure. The school, then I reached India in winter of 1992, and I was admitted to a school called Tibetan Children's Village School that was established by Dalai Lama back in 60s. As Ken mentioned, the very experience of Tibetan refugees are very unique among all the exiles in, I think most probably in the history of the world. But what really happened was that Dalai Lama gave a very kind of strong emphasis on imparting modern education to Tibetan children. And he, back in 59 or early 60s, he asked India's then Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to help him to start a school for Tibetan refugees in India. At that time, in 59, around 80,000 Tibetans followed Dalai Lama to exile. So there are thousands of small Tibetan students. And Nehru gave a very quick response to Dalai Lama's request, and he said, sure, I'll send all your Tibetan kids to best residential schools in India. And then Dalai Lama was like, no, this is not what I was asking. I actually want a unique school for Tibetan where we can teach them how to be Tibetan. So that's kind of the basis of that school. And the fundamental, the ideological concept or environment of that school was based on two principles. One is others before self, and another one is come to learn and go to serve. That's how we are brought in that school, despite being a refugee and being separated from one's family. When I arrived in that school in winter of 1992, I missed my parents very, I really missed them. And in fact, I conspired with three of my friends to run from school and go back to Tibet. Actually, we had a 20 rupees at that time, which is kind of, 50 cents. So with that, we planned to go from Dharamsala to Tibet, which is like, 1,000 miles. And we got at the bus station called Lower Dharamsala. There we were caught by a school teacher, and we were punished in the school. But then gradually I started liking the school, and it's a really beautiful school. The school structure is such that they are around 40 different homes. We numbered them home number 1, 2, 3. There are 40 different homes, and maybe 4 hostels, 2 for boys and 2 for senior girls. And each home has about 40 children like my age and 2 foster parents. So we go to class during the class time, and after class we live as a big family together. We cook together, we play together. That's a huge kind of family life. And in hindsight, I believe that's the place where they gave me the purpose of my existence. So I'm ever grateful to that school.
I just want to say something about the school. Well, first, let me just say a bit about Norbu, because what you were talking about not being able to see your family, that's the case with so many Tibetans, and that was the case with Norbu. And there's a scene in the second chapter where we meet him, and I had just gotten off the bus from Delhi to Dharamsala. I was taking this overnight bus. It was 12 hours, and it goes up these mountain roads, and going down is worse because you're just. I get car sick just going across town in Manhattan. So, it's a it takes a lot out of you. So I think I got out at 6:30 and just had to go for a walk to get some air. And there's a circumambulatory route, meaning like a holy route where people walk around in a circle. It's called the Kora in Dharamsala, and I went to just take a walk there. And then I bumped into Norbu, and we were both so surprised to see each other at 6:30 in the morning. And Norbu, he kind of looks like a hipster, or he did then, like cool shaggy haircut and hooded sweatshirts and stuff. But he told me that every morning he would walk the Kora, and he told me later that he did that because he was praying that he could go see his mother, who was aging. And just to I'll give you a spoiler, is that Norbu ended up getting asylum in Australia, and there are 3 chapters of the book set in Australia because I got to visit him, which was such a, what a privilege to do that. But when I saw him in Melbourne, the same thing. He was still trying to see his mother, and he was telling me he tried to get a visa multiple times from Australia. He had gotten citizenship by then, and he couldn't get it. And so he was thinking he might try to go to Thailand and try to get the visa there, and that maybe it could be easier. So that's a very common refrain, and amongst many Tibetan exiles.
And could you maybe describe a bit, Norbu's experience in Melbourne versus Dharamsala? Because, he comes from this town where there's a, very genuine effort to replicate or at least maintain Tibetan culture. And suddenly he's in this vast city.
Yeah, he was doing really well. The transit school, although it was a really rough transition for him when he was in India, it had prepared him quite well because he had learned English, and English is the key. And that was key to his finding a job in Australia. The Australian government has a program for basically former political prisoners, and they have a set number of visas for former Tibetan political prisoners, and Norbu was one of them. And he was able to transition fairly quickly, and he found a job as a chef. When I met him because I would eat at the same restaurant every day, and he was a chef in Dharamsala, and there was a very good vegetarian Japanese restaurant, so I ate there every day and met him. And so he was able to transition fairly quickly because he had learned English, and also there was a nonprofit called Guchu Sum that's based in Dharamsala that's specifically for former political prisoners from Tibet, and they help them with vocational training and all kinds of programs to help them transition.
Okay, maybe we can look at one of your other characters, which should we look at Deki and Dundup?
Yeah, Deki and Dundup. So I met them in winter of 2008. So I had moved up to Dharamsala by then. And a Tibetan friend introduced us and asked if I could help them learn English. And I didn't know anything about them. And so I did get to know them quite well. And they had fled in the winter of 2008 because in March 2008, when those protests were happening, they helped a Tibetan monk friend photocopy some flyers. So all Deki did, she photocopied maybe a couple dozen flyers that said something like human rights in Tibet or something like that. So later that year, they heard that their monk friend had gotten arrested. And after that, they instantly decided to flee because it was so dangerous for them. And I asked them, was it hard to decide to leave? Because they had managed to build up like a middle class life in Lhasa, in the capital of Tibet. And they weren't. I mean, they were. You know, Decky's father was a construction worker, so you know it's quite difficult to like get into a middle class job. They had like good office jobs and things like that. So they had a house, and they left everything behind instantly. And Decky said, no, it wasn't hard to decide. Our fear was so great. Our decision was immediate and instant, and they didn't tell their families because they didn't want to endanger them in any way. So they left immediately, and yeah, I might look at a passage from that. But yeah, do you remember from that time in March 2008? You were still in India by then, right? And you know the turmoil that was going on, and people feeling like they were in jeopardy there, and you know people deciding to leave. And do you remember that time?
Actually, one of my friend who was in same school, Tibetan school, he came to India just like me when he was around 10 or 11. Then he returned back to Tibet in maybe, I don't remember exactly, but he returned back to Tibet and he started working for a Red Cross in Tibet. And in 2008, when this mass protest happened, he was also part of that protest group. And soon after that, his photo appeared across the Lhasa, the Pago Street, which is kind of downtown in Lhasa. So, and some of his friend told him to some of his friend told him to leave him and go hide in the mountains. So he told them that I have run enough in this lifetime. I'm not going to run anymore. That's what he told to that friends of mine. And he was arrested, and he was sentenced. He was given a sentence of 11 years sentence, and he was supposed to release in 2021 or something. But then, 2 years after imprisonment, he was tortured so badly in the Chinese prison, and he was released. Suddenly, and within 2 days after arrival to his home, he died of Chinese torture. So the freedom is like it's really important. I think it's everything. We live the experience of not being free every day. So it's something worth fighting for, I guess.
Do you want to read a passage? Amy?
Yeah, I just want to read this part about Decky. So, let's see. So this was after I asked Decky, was it hard to leave? And she said, there was no question that they had to leave Tibet, yet a hollow sense of loss consumed Decky. And this is, she's remembering when she was in Nepal, like they managed to cross over. So now she's remembering her time when they just escaped into Nepal. So they're in a reception center where Tibetan refugees go after they've crossed over. So she says she's pretty stoic. Like she's, normally when I talk to her, she's not, she's quite a stoic person, but she said she would cry into her blanket at night. And she said, we spent our whole life in Tibet under Chinese control. We had worked so hard to get jobs in an office where we could work like Chinese people. We got all these opportunities and then we lost them all. Decky's loss was literal too. In Nepal, she lost the baby that had been growing inside of her for nearly 2 months, conceived in Tibet, but lost during their escape. Later, she shared with me a letter she wrote in Chinese that recounted, in Chinese, I'll get back to that in a minute, she wrote in Chinese that recounted their flight from Tibet. It described emotions Decky didn't articulate when we talked in person. Quote, we lost our first family member during our escape, she wrote. We had given him or her so much hope. We had hoped that in the future, even if we ended up in a place where we had no other family, we would not end up being alone, even if one of us should die. We had thought that we would try our best to raise the child to be a useful talent for Tibet, but in the blink of an eye, everything fell apart. And I'm just going to skip to a couple pages forward. So they were telling me about this decision to leave, and they lost everything, including, this baby that, when Deki was pregnant. And I said to her, was their loss, all for 50 sheets of paper, worth it? I remembered asking the same question of a Tibetan man imprisoned in a Chinese jail for 7 months. After the prison guards beat him, they left him naked in the cold, so pain seeped deep into his body. His crime, making photocopies of the Tibetan flag. He still suffered health problems, and though he had escaped India, he could not earn a living. Did he regret making those photocopies? I asked him quietly. Tears slid down his face, and he wiped them away with the flat of his hand. He nodded. So Deki and Dundup lost so much, their home, jobs, relatives, and the beginnings of a baby. But without hesitation, both she and Dundup shook their heads at my question about regret. She said, even though we had to leave Tibet, we don't regret making the photocopies. Deki replied firmly, we did something right, something good for Tibet. Incredibly brave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
This would be a good time to talk about the relationship between Tibetans and Chinese.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about the, because in Dharamsala, it's not only Tibetans, it's also Chinese democracy activists.
So, as I mentioned, I'm Chinese American, and as I told you in the beginning, the Dalai Lama came right up to me. So he's very ardent about reaching out to Chinese people, even Americans like me, and this is a form of maybe soft diplomacy, with formal talks between Tibet and China at an impasse. He's always reached out, not always, he emphasizes reaching out to Chinese people and being, connecting with them. So at one point in a press conference where, I observed him in many press conferences when I was in Dharamsala, he said something like, my faith in the Chinese government is getting thinner and thinner, but I still have faith in Chinese people. And what a thing to say given everything. But the unexpected and surprising thing, so many people have said to me, oh, you must have had a hard time in Dharamsala because people must have been hostile to you since you're Chinese, ethnically Chinese. And I actually was the opposite. And Tibetan people were always really warm and welcoming to me. And they would come up to me in the street. And sometimes people were a little disappointed I was American, actually, because they wanted to talk to someone from China. And this happened even in southern India. I was in the largest Tibetan settlement is in the state of Karnataka, and this settlement is called Bailakuppe. It's 5 hours south of Bangalore. And an elderly Tibetan woman came up to me and started speaking Mandarin and asked me, if I was from China. And when I said I was American, she just left. She wasn't that interested in that. But the Dalai Lama also makes it a priority to meet with Chinese people who come to Dharamsala. And, I've seen audiences where he's, met with ethnically Chinese people, but I met some Chinese democracy activists who were there in 2008, and one of the main people I profile or I feature, he sees his cause as totally aligned with the Tibetan cause. It's not any different for him. So I'll find a little passage where I'll read a quote from him, but. March 2009 was the 50th anniversary of the Tibetan exile, and it was a big milestone. And it was quite a tense time because there was a lot of questions about whether there would be unrest like there had been the year before in 2008. But China had clamped down so hard on Tibet. It was, there was just very little activity. It was a very, tough clampdown. But I remember the celebrations or the ceremony for the 50th anniversary of the exile. I should say it's a commemoration. It wasn't a celebration, commemoration. But on the stage next to the Dalai Lama, he had like a dozen Chinese democracy activists with him on the stage. And one of them is Australian. He emigrated to Australia, and he is sort of like a spokesperson. But you know, that might be surprising to some people that, you know, he would share the stage with Chinese people, but it seemed kind of natural actually at the time. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, like that kind of outreach to Chinese.
Sure. I mean, despite the fact that we have all the reason to be very angry with the China as a country, but because of leadership of His Holiness, he often advised us to not get angry toward Chinese people, and we really take that to our heart. And I have my personal experience. When I first came to U.S. to study at Emory University, there were two Chinese girls, one from Beijing and one from Xi'an, and we spent initially, after spending few months, they told me that you might be a very bad human being because you are Tibetan. That's what she said, she thought. And then you turned out to be a really nice human being, and we actually become a very good friend after 2 years. So that's how kind of, you know, the Chinese, typical Chinese are brainwashed by Communist Party to look at Tibetans as something barbaric, something very uncivilized. So that's kind of, you know, brainwash that's happening there. But majority of Tibetan, I would say, 90% of Tibetan will not say, as very clearly evident in Amis' book, most of them will not be angry toward Chinese people. I think as for me, I think it's because of one for a moral reason, another for a practical, realistic reason, because they are 1 point for Chinese people, and it's too much to hate all of them. So.
Yeah, and I mean, in the first chapter, one of the main people I follow in the book, his name is Tupton, and we're sitting at a basketball game because he really loves basketball, and this is in Dharamsala. And I just kept saying to him, I was like, so you're not afraid of me? You don't like hate Chinese people? He's like, no, we don't hate Chinese people. We hate the Chinese government. So just being able to distinguish between that, I thought was so powerful. And then, you know, I asked that question a lot of Tibetans I would meet. And in Sydney, I bumped into a Tibetan former political prisoner I had met in Dharamsala. We were both so surprised to see each other in Sydney. And I had lunch at his house with him and his wife. And he was like, no, I don't have an issue with Chinese people. In fact, when I was in prison, some of my friends were Chinese. And it's like, yes, who were the other people who were imprisoned? So I might just read a little bit of something that one of the democracy activists said. So his name is Qin Jin, and this is March 10th, 2009, and he's really interesting. You know, the subtitle of this chapter, Qin Jin was just like, I'm just an ordinary Chinese democracy activist. Like, I don't think you're an ordinary Chinese democracy activist. Anyway, he says, he's explaining to me his view on this relationship, or also what the democracy activists have in common. So we're at this place called Hotel Tibet, which is a place where a lot of the exile government officials like to hang out. It's kind of like a seedy hotel bar. And Qin Jin was surprisingly optimistic about China's opening up and democratizing. This was 2009, so things are very different. In the next, this is what he says, in the next 3 to 5 years, change will start. Next 20 years will be change for sure. I'm very confident. someone said to me, when you were 71, you can happily see the big change already. Not sure what he would say now, so I'll have to ask him. What could the Federation for Democratic China do for Tibet? I asked. Qingjin rattled off a well-rehearsed, though sincere summary. We are here to give Tibetans our support. We want to form a coalition in Europe that could give inspiration to people. We want people inside China to fight for their rights, to fight for democracy. Freedom of Tibet is part of our movement. Democracy means everyone has freedom to think, speak, move around, and choose their government. So free Tibet. We should treat them equally, invite them to keep their own language, culture, and religion. Tibetans and His Holiness do not claim for independence. They just want meaningful autonomy. Chinese people should not be brainwashed. Chinese people should open their eyes and ears to see the truth. So that's what he said.
All right. We're going to come to you in just a minute. So think up questions or things you want to talk about. But Amy, I want to ask you one last question before we do that. I gather that you found this experience, resilient and uplifting, but it's also depressing because here's the people who have no prospect of regaining their homeland, and they are, doing their best to maintain a culture abroad. But how did you see that balance?
Yeah, some people have said to me, "Oh, your book is about refugees. It must be depressing, right?" And I, although there is, certainly sadness and loss, I actually found so many of the people inspiring. So I want to just tell you something that the then Prime Minister of the exile government is Samdang Rinpoche. He was in his 70s at the time, I think. So we're back at the 50th anniversary, which was March 2009. And in the morning, there had been a big ceremony with the Dalai Lama and lots of crowds around him. And then in the afternoon, I saw the Prime Minister walking across the courtyard by himself with a bodyguard, just one bodyguard. So we had a chance to just sit down and talk. He was really informal. I just went up to him and we started talking. And at the time, he was really concerned about what the situation was in Tibet because of the crackdown. There's a communication blackout. There was just a lot of fear and anxiety about what could be happening in Tibet. And so, he seemed really tired and stressed and drained. But then I said to him, I asked him about his memories of, so here's I'll just read this passage. Samdang Rinpoche seemed to visibly relax when I asked what the 50th anniversary of Tibetan exile meant to him. He sat up a little straighter, and for a moment his fatigue vanished. In the exhibition at the Tibet Museum, there were photos of Samdang Rinpoche from over the years. One showed him as a much younger man, his face not yet gaunt and strained. Some of that vitality returned for a moment. He said, "My memories of my life spent in Tibet are more clear than memories of yesterday," he declared nostalgically. Samdang Rinpoche looked in the distance and smiled. He said, "I remember the colors and shapes of trees in my monastery and the friends we debated with. The last 50 years have seen tremendous change, unbelievable change, so I'm satisfied in many ways. The last 50 years have been the darkest in our history, but Tibetan culture has spread to all corners of the world. His Holiness is respected all over the world. That is a great achievement. We have modern education at the same time, traditional education. We must be satisfied." And he said, "Sooner or later, China will have to be more democratic. Then the Tibet issue will be properly resolved. We have not wasted the past 50 years. We have used them properly." Yeah, I didn't exactly, so there were so many tragic things happening. However, the stories of the people and their outlook was just inspiring and quite incredible. And I'll just read one last passage where I met this young man in Sarnath, which is in the middle of India. It's a Buddhist holy city. And he had been studying at Hampshire College, which is a very liberal arts college in Western Massachusetts. So he was studying film, and I think this was just a short comment he made. I'm always asking people about identity, and how do you feel? Are you Tibetan or Indian or in between? And he says, his name was Kemrab, and he replied decisively, I'm 40% Tibetan, 60% Indian. And he said, any people who are devoid of land create their own small community wherever they go. That's the positive side of being a refugee. It's also beautiful. From one side, it's a terrible thing that Tibet fell, but every day more and more people are getting into Tibetan Buddhism and everything Tibet. And he said, Kemrab said he was just overwhelmed by the Dalai Lama's presence at this teaching we were at. The teaching had like 20,000 people. And Kemrab said, when you have so much reverence for someone, you will get goosebumps, your hair will stand up, he gushed. I'm always praying inside when I'm in his proximity. Then he confessed with a sheepish laugh, this is the 100th time I promised myself I'm going to quit smoking and drinking. Yeah, so I thought that was such a funny thing to say, just very candid, and yeah. And it was just a comment he made. I didn't really interview him even really interview him. I was just talking to him.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, we'll start right here. Go ahead. Oh, hang on, we have a microphone coming.
Well, the title of the book is Far from the Rooftop of the World, and in a single breath, you mentioned so many disparate countries that you've been tracking these stories. I was wondering if you have any stories from the road, or just how have you managed all that travel, and just like how do you make a book like this happen over the course of all those years?
Yeah, that's a long story. So there's one chapter that's set in Bailakuppe, which is in southern India, and the way I got there was to work I was working full-time as a journalist, and actually for part of the time I was also working at a microfinance company, so I was really busy. But for southern India, I was working on an article about solar energy in India, and so it was close to this Tibetan settlement. And I thought, okay, I can write the article and then I can visit the Tibetan settlement. This was my life, like trying to figure out how to do the logistics, and partially, I could, get some travel expenses paid because I was writing the article and cobble every piece together. But for my way back from the Tibetan settlement, you've been to Bailakuppe, yeah. It's 5 hours from Bangalore, so it's not close. And I was staying at a guest house. It was like $8, which is, it's a really good guest house. If you ever need a guest house there, a good recommendation. And so, trying to keep my expenses down, and the people that I wasn't sure how I was going to get back to Bangalore to get my flight to Delhi. And then the people at the guest house said, "Oh, there's a bus, and it just stops on this road, and just go stand there at 11 o'clock. And I actually wrote that back into the chapter because it gives you a sense of what it was like to be there. And so I did that. I just went out to the road with my LL Bean backpack, and then the bus came. And the driver was really surprised to see me as well. He was like, "Who's this woman standing on the side of the road at 11 o'clock?" And it was actually a really nice bus, and miraculously, it went straight to Bangalore, and there's no traffic then. So I got straight to the airport, and normally I'm like running for flights, and I was early, and I got there at like 6 in the morning because we're 5 in the morning. So there's a lot of like cobbling pieces together, and then even like the later chapters, like when I was in Australia, I only booked that flight. I was in Bangladesh. I was working on different articles. I was working on probably articles about reducing child mortality in Bangladesh. That's what I was doing, yeah. And then I decided to go within 3 days, and I booked the flight. And I could only do that because a friend said I could stay with his sister-in-law in Melbourne. So, I have a lot of acknowledgements about all the people who helped along the way, because I could not have done it without them. And I definitely could not have done the Australia part without these friends in Melbourne. So it took a real village, yeah.
Hi, I'm really enjoying this conversation, and what I'm curious to hear from you, Amy, and from you is I'm thinking about refugees, displaced people, exiled people, and listening to the stories that you're talking about for the people that you stayed connected with over time. And I'm curious to hear what methods did people use to stay in communication with their family back home so that they weren't, and and how you stay in touch with your family over time, or if, and the challenges that people face to still maintain that familial tie, their tie to their home.
I think the most, for me, personally for me, the most difficult, despite all the problem that Tibetan people face, it's an unimaginable problem. But personally for me, the biggest problem is that I'm not able to speak to my father. I'm not able to speak to my mother as I wished. Even if we speak, we have to be super careful, because I can't. First, I do speak with them maybe twice, no, once in 2 months. And before I start my conversation, I make sure there's no problem. I used to ask them, for example, it's just understood between us. When somebody is oppressing you, you become very kind of, creative. So that's kind of understood. I used to ask my dad, hey, how's everything? No, I used to ask something like, how's weather today? Is it sunny today? And he would say, oh, weather is not good today. So that I took it as it's not time to speak. So I was like, okay, keep warm, stay healthy, bye. So that's what. And we can't speak anything about a sensitive topic. If I were to inform the Dalai Lama's health to my family, I would say, oh, our brother is doing fine, or our uncle is doing fine, or our auntie is doing fine. So basically, they understand that it's a very difficult situation. But I want to respond to, if I may, very quickly, I want to respond to Ken's observation that, I mean, if we put our very kind of, realistic perspective, it might seem there is no prospect for Tibetan people. But as a Tibetan myself, I absolutely see there's 100% prospect for the future of Tibetan people. And one example that I want to cite is that when India was under British occupation, nobody thought that India will gain their freedom. Now leave alone. Now the Indian origin guy, Rishi Sunak, become a prime minister of UK. So it's almost unimaginable at one point of time, and now it's reality. So same case goes to Nelson Mandela when he was fighting in South Africa against apartheid government. So as a Tibetan, I totally see a very bright future for Tibetan people. I mean, it's very difficult challenge right now, but future is certainly bright.
And let me just say, I agree with you. I think Xi Jinping is in the process of showing the weakness of dictatorial rule. And over, he's making decisions that he feels are necessary to maintain his power, but are harmful to the Chinese economy or the Chinese people. And it's this last few years have been a real turning point, I think, and it's going to be downhill for a while. And that speaks well for the prospect of people looking for an alternative government and maybe for some freedom for Tibet.
Yeah, and I think that brief passage I read, even Xinjiang, he, at that time, this was 2009, people thought things could change. So it just depends on the administration, and currently things don't look good, but things can change. And actually, in the very first chapter, when I'm having this conversation with Topton at the basketball game, the monk, he said something along the lines of, oh, well, China can change at any time, right? That's an autocracy. And he said, they can snap their fingers and change the next day. And actually, with Deng Xiaoping, first 1978, suddenly, so it's years and years of just this authoritarian communism, and then Deng Xiaoping's like, okay, let's have capitalism, and now we have the China we know today. That so we don't know, and under this current administration, it doesn't look good, but things things could change. And yeah, the monk just, Tupton, he said, you know, he snapped his fingers and he was like, things can change like that if they want. So.
Yes. Hang on.
Yes, just wanted to quickly chime in because we have a question from our online audience.
Okay, so let's take that and then we'll come to you, sir.
This question is for Amy from Victoria, who is a journalist and a former Logan Nonfiction Fellow. The question is, what was it like to revisit a manuscript begun by a younger self? As the refugees in your book change, you also must have matured as a person and writer since 2008. Did you view your first encounters and conversations in a different light? Was there anything in particular that you could only see with the gift of age?
I could write a whole thing just about that, but I know we want to talk about human rights. So, thank you, Victoria. It is strange. I was like fairly young when I started this, and I didn't think I was young. Now looking back, I'm like, yeah, I was young, and things. Yeah, I do feel different, and I think at the time when I started this, I mean, this book almost didn't get published. And it's a small miracle it's here today. So at the time when I started, I had like really big hopes, I guess, for it. And then over many, many years, your hopes get dashed because things happen and you get a lot of, I had a lot of obstacles and almost dropped this book. And not because I never had doubts about the stories in the book, and I say that in the afterword. So I think that's what kept me going. But now today, like I actually have like less like personal attachment to the book, which is kind of fittings about Buddhism, since non-attachment is one of the ideas, principles of Buddhism, and so I'm not as it's here. I'm glad, but it's not the same like. I don't have the same ego attachment to it as I did in the beginning. But I think if you kind of had to, it had a lot of knockdowns in the last, more than a decade since I started. So, but yeah, we can talk a lot about that. And then just a lot of the reporting in this book. I mean, while I was doing my other work, I would still keep writing about Tibetan issues. So I would go up every year to Dharamsala and still keep writing and articles. And so to just kind of keep that thread going, even when I was in Bangladesh, even, last part of the book, I was actually reporting in Africa, and I was still trying to, I would write emails about the book. I was still trying to, follow up with agents or editors and whatnot. So the thread, I had to keep it going. So, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. This is a question really for all three of you, and maybe starting with Ken. I'm curious now that the exile has been more than 60 years ago, and the kind of host country has been India, and I'm wondering how that relationship as a host has evolved over that long period of time, and if it's better than it was, if it's getting worse, or in other words, how does India now feel about what it decided to do more than 60 years ago, and is that a model for other countries and how they face asylum seekers? I mean, frankly, I don't want to even start talking about the whole situation in Palestine, but you've got a long period of history here, and certainly it's got to be a dynamic relationship.
Do you want to say something about that, or do you want me to? I mean, it is remarkable, right? That India welcomed, at one point, I would say like 100,000 Tibetans from 59 onward. The section about Bailakupi in southern India, it's like how did Tibetans come all the way here? I mean, that was originally like jungle that was cleared. The chief ministers of various states, they're like the governors. Nehru, I think, had asked them, where else can Tibetans live? And land was volunteered to allocate to them. And this the settlement called Bailakupi, it's a town. It's big. It's like not a. It's much bigger than Dharamsala, and I haven't been to the other settlements, but there are settlements in many other states in India, and I think it's pretty remarkable that a country would be willing to do that and to let Tibetans set up their own education system. I mean, it does still conform to the Indian curriculum too, but it's Tibetan. In the exile government offices, they fly the Tibetan flag alongside the Indian flag. The relationship isn't perfect, I'm sure, but like it's quite remarkable. I don't know exactly why. And we talked about this last time. Like,
I mean, maybe if I could probe a little bit, because is it, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Because it's not like the Indian government is, welcoming of the Rohingya or of Muslims or, so what is it about Tibetans that is different?
I think the connection between India and Tibet culturally is, for example, I would say 95% of Tibetan are Buddhist. So at that 90% of the way we think, way we understand things, or our behaviors are influenced by Buddhism. So Buddhism came from India. So we have a very strong cultural tie with India. And for example, the Tibetan script that we even use today, that was developed based on a Devanagari script, which is part of Sanskrit script. So Tibetans, except for our top geography, we have much more to do with the Indian culture than the Chinese culture. We have nothing common with the Chinese culture. So there's very strong cultural affinity. For example, in Tibetans, we say our name for India is, in Tibetan we say Phagbe Yu, which literally translates to as land of everything that is noble. So that's kind of, attitude that we have for India. And also, so kind of it's true a brother in real sense, not for political necessities. But definitely now that the China is becoming much stronger within the part of, not just part of Asia, but overall around the world, the Indian government I think they're paying much more attention right now, I guess.
yeah, I mean, I think the relationship between the Dalai Lama and Nehru was very strong, and that has to be a big part of it. Yeah, I'd love to ask the Dalai Lama one day exactly this question: why did Nehru do this? And opened up, big parts of India, and Dharamsala itself was like I described this in the 3rd chapter. Dharamsala was like a ghost town, actually. It was quite empty because there was a huge earthquake there that destroyed everything, and actually there's a huge earthquake risk still. But then it was sort of decided that, the Dalai Lama could be based there. And, now we have today this microcosm of Tibetan culture in Dharamsala. But I do think it's remarkable, and just to give you some contrast, when I was reporting in Bangladesh, this was like 2015, so there were already camps for Rohingya in Bangladesh, but it had not reached the stage a few years later of the genocide in Myanmar. But I was thinking about going to where the Rohingya live. It's called Cox's Bazar, and you actually, it's very hard to get there. You're not really allowed to go. And so I was looking at, just ways I could get access, and it would have been really difficult. And it's not like Dharamsala. I mean, it's just a town, and you can go, anyone can go there. You can go talk to, as a journalist, the exile government's very open. It's very easy to talk to them, and very easy to talk to really anyone there. So I don't know what to say, but like in other, let's say with the Rohingya, it's completely different. They're not allowed to leave. They have no rights there. They can't work. Like it's extremely, like there's abject poverty. So really different situation.
I think our time is up, but Amy, I just want to maybe one last question for you, which is, what are you working on next?
Okay. Well, this book I was actually working on a proposal for a different nonfiction book, and then I accidentally got a contract for this. And that other nonfiction book is actually about Chaldeans. Does anyone know who Chaldeans are? They are a Catholic minority from Iraq, and the largest population of them outside of Iraq is in Detroit. So it's a contemporary story that takes place in 2009 around the recession. And so there's like an incredible story because I met young he's a guy dude from Detroit, but he's Chaldean, and I met him on a boat in Croatia, as one does. And when he told me his story and his family story, I was like, that's amazing. And I thought it was about, I can share more, but that was supposed to be what I was working on now. Yeah, and then I'd really like to do like a magazine article about the Rohingya in Bangladesh.
I think we all ready to go to Dar es Salaam. And really want to thank Amy for writing this book and sharing it with us. Thanks very much to Ken and to Se Wong, and again to Vivian. I think I neglected to introduce myself before. I apologize. I'm Jessica Neuwirth, the director of the Human Rights Program here. And I also just want to underscore all of our co-sponsors, from Hunter College, the Asian American Studies Program and Center, the MFA program, the Sociology Department, and then also the Asian American Journalists Association and the South Asian Journalists Association. So there's a lot of interest in and support for this book, and let's continue the conversation upstairs. Please join me in thanking our panel, and we'll see you up in the fourth room.
Thank you to all the organizers for doing that.